Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Day 3 of the 2021 International Conference on Official Statistics. On behalf of Statistics Korea and the United Nations Statistics Division, I'd like to thank all of the speakers and participants for joining us at this event. I'm Hyunshim Amy Choi, Master of Ceremony of this conference. This year's conference is organized under the theme of the role of data and statistics in understanding and mitigating risk, what we have learned from crisis situations, including the global pandemic. Over the last 2 days, we have reflected on how disasters, including the global pandemic, have accelerated innovation and transformation in statistics and data systems. Today, we aim to stretch beyond the horizon and navigate ways forward. If you registered at the conference and are joining us through live streaming in our official conference website, you can choose either Korean or English channel using the live streaming menu options. Also, anyone joining us through our official conference website can participate in Q&A and discussion by leaving their questions and comments in the comment section located in the website under the live streaming tab. The website also provides detailed information of this conference, including its program, biography of speakers, and presentation materials for downloading. That's all for the housekeeping announcements. We'll be moving down on the program to replay the keynote speech for Day 3, delivered by Mr. Samuel Anim, Government Statistician of Ghana Statistical Service. Mr. Anim has been leading GSS's transformative agenda for modernizing statistical production and ensuring organizational agility against rapidly changing economic and social environment. During the COVID-19 pandemic, GSS, under Mr. Anim's leadership, escalated their efforts in providing relevant data by conducting 3 surveys to track the effects of COVID-19 on businesses, the local economy and households, and jobs. In 2021, the first digital population and housing census has been implemented. Mr. Anim shared his insights in this pre-recorded keynote speech, so please turn your attention to the video.
I have the honor to welcome all of you to the Day 3, Session 6 of the International Conference on Official Statistics. This session has the privilege to look at issues around building resilient data and statistical systems, focusing on what we've learned from the pandemic, our responses to it, and explore some new technical and financial needs that are associated with official statistics. Given the focus of our session, I make an attempt to put my presentation in 3 broad contexts, where I look at issues surrounding the characterization of what we mean by resilience, the current discourses around statistical systems and the use of statistical data. We try to draw a distinction between statistics and data and statistical data. The second area of my concentration will be to tell the story of Ghana during the pandemic and the interventions that we put in place to prove the concept of being resilient and how to respond to pandemics. And I would end off my speech with some takeaways that we all would want to reflect on it moving forward. By way of characterizing resilience, I make an attempt to put it in 7 broad contexts. To begin with, it's important we appreciate the fact that there are 2 extreme ends to resilience. One that I characterize it as an ex post consideration, and the other that I characterize it as an ex ante consideration. And what I mean by these 2 characterizations of resilience is, once you do not prepare for it and it occurs, your reflections should be on how do I address the occurrence of an adverse shock that was not anticipated. And once you prepare for it and you have systems that you put in place for any kind of adverse shock, we treat resilience from an ex-ante perspective. The third area that I put emphasis on in characterization of resilience has to do with understanding your modes of operations and variations in your performance in the event of the occurrence of an adverse shock. Once you are putting in place this consideration, 2 things should come to mind. whether you've reached an optimal stage of your operations, i.e. if you're a National Statistical Office, whether your dispensations are in tune with the expectations as per your Statistical Service Law or what your functions mandate you to do. And the fourth area for consideration is the speed of recovery, that is the characterization of resilience is the speed of recovery. So it's not just the occurrence of an adverse shock, but what is critical here is that you had reached a steady state of performance and there is an adverse shock, and the concern is how fast am I going to recover? And once you're thinking about how fast you're going to recover, then the fifth issue kicks in, which has to do with the mitigation of the risk and the coping strategies. And here what you need to think about is what interventions are you putting in place, what are the synergies of the interventions that are being put in place, i.e. within your national statistical system, within your National Statistical Office, and within the broad economy. And then finally you think about the timing of the interventions. So mitigating the risk in an attempt to ensure that you speedily get out of the adverse shock that has occurred will rely on three things, i.e. the interventions that you are putting in place, the synergies across the interventions, and the timing of the interventions. As a statistical agency, we need to prepare ourselves beyond just putting across statistical data once we are thinking about the characterization of resilience. And I strongly hold the view that we should make an attempt to internally assess the adverse shock or the pandemic from, again, three perspectives. What is your desired and your previous state of operations prior to the occurrence of the shock? What is your mode and state of operations after the occurrence of the shock? And once the interventions have been in place, you do an assessment of the mode and state of operations after the interventions have been put in place. And this will not have to be done only within the National Statistical System as an isolated organization, but in the broad context of how the country is responding to the pandemic. Having gone through this, I tried to make an attempt to look at the two other areas that are reflected in the theme for our session, which has to do with the national discourse on data, statistics, statistical data, and systems. All of us as National Statistical Offices or operators within the National Statistical System, our core concern has surrounded the issues of generation, use, and storage of statistics and data for that matter. It is important to advance that conversation to where we're thinking about interoperability within the National Statistical System and between the policy environment and the National Statistical System. And here, once we are talking about digitization, the conversations around data, statistics, statistical systems should move beyond generation, use, and storage, and as I indicated, to begin to focus on the digital systems that have been instituted to ensure interoperability, one, across data, and two, between data and policy that is being made. And we in Ghana, some attempts are being made to ensure that this is tracked on a regular basis to prop up the use of data. And thirdly, what I put emphasis on the discourse around data, statistics, statistical system, is the whole concept of proving that statistics is the only way. And in times that I've advised on this matter, I place emphasis on what National Statistical Offices should begin to do, and they have to prove the concept that if you do not use data, these are the consequences. And this is pretty much different from showing the benefits of using data. What I'm putting emphasis on here is proving the concept of the consequences of not using data. And then the third area, which is reflected in our theme for this session, has to do with new technical and financial needs and the next steps. Indeed, I say little about this third area in the sense that I'm pretty much convinced that we really have revolutionized statistics, statistical systems, and data, both on a global scale and on a national scale. And now there are new platforms by which all of us are engaging from an international point of view. And I take this opportunity to highlight the last four fundamental principles of quality data, which has to do with obliging with international standards, making sure that you have international collaborations, and making sure that what you do fits into the overall framework of what is expected of you as a national statistical system. So there is a good leverage for us to benefit from bilateral engagement and also multilateral engagement. And that is precisely what Ghana Statistical Service in the last 2 years has been focusing on. On the front of financial needs, I am also pretty optimistic that we need not to look far, in the sense that statistical offices should rise beyond the concern that we do not have resources to run our organizations, simply from the perspective that data is the new oil, because we need evidence to direct our investment. And here I touch on some innovative ways that some statistical offices are putting in place to ensure that they raise resources to run their own engagement. One is what Statistics Canada is doing with its census data. If you go on their website, they're creating a hub for small enterprises on how to use the census data to place their industries, to make decisions on investment. And this is the thinking that as statistical organizations, we should begin to avert our minds to on how internally we can raise resources. In any case, on the global scale, resources are being sought for to ensure that NSOs that are in deprived countries can raise themselves up to a certain level to ensure that they can meet what is required. So here I tell the story of Ghana Statistical Service from three perspectives: within the National Statistical Office, beyond the National Statistical Office, but within the country. Therefore, we are thinking about within the National Statistical System. And lastly, I put emphasis on our international engagement. Within the National Statistical System, what we did during the pandemic, again, is to look at it from our expectations from the state point of view, our institutional responsiveness, and also what we did during the pandemic. Like a number of national statistical offices, we did roll out 3 rapid trackers, 1 tracker in business surveys, another tracker in household survey, and the 3rd tracker from the local economy point of view. We did put a dashboard to monitor the infection rate and also identified indicators that would precipitate the severity of the infection, i.e. areas where smoking was dominant, i.e. areas where they were not obliging with the hygienic practices. So you found on our dashboard these information to help government make a decision on where the intervention should be focused. And also through other means, we engage the public, one from an opinion point of view on how we think the pandemic would rise, plateau, and if it's going to dip, it does. So from a statistical agency, we really were proactive in the kind of things that we had to do to ensure that the pandemic is abated. And again, from the national point of view, we got the National COVID Response Team and the Ministry of Finance falling on the Ghana Statistical Service for data to ensure that the policies that are put in place align with what we do. What is more important, which I want to put emphasis on, is proving resilience during a pandemic. And what I mean by proving resilience during a pandemic is not relenting on your national statistical releases, i.e. the inflation, the national account, and thankfully we obliged to release all our scheduled core national statistics, i.e. inflation and national accounts. What is more important, which I want to emphasize on, is other national activities that rarely occur, such as the censuses and the fact that you are able to hold yourself in a manner that you don't relent your preparation in the event of a pandemic. So throughout the pandemic, we continue to put in interventions that would continuously help us prepare for the census, and thankfully we've done our 2021 population housing census. Data collection has ended, and currently we are doing field clearance to ensure that within 3 months since the data collection ended, we're going to put up our preliminary results. So we've proved the concept of resilience to a point that even in the face of pandemic, Ghana is one of the countries that have been able to do not just a census, but its first fully digital census and also an in-person census, which pose a high risk amid COVID-19 and the associated consequences. The second area in the storytelling is our external engagement within the national statistical system. And again, here we're talking about harmonization within the among the various ministries, departments, and agencies that produce statistics, that use statistics, and that store statistics. And what we are putting emphasis here is lobbying to an extent that would make the National Statistical Office indeed the coordinator within the National Statistical System. And what I mean by lobbying here is that you get higher state agencies that would bring the key players together to ensure that they adhere to what their respective mandate is in a way that statistics is coordinated in the country. So 2 things that we did was to get the Vice President's office to bring to the table some key agencies, i.e. the National Identification System, the Ghana Immigration System, the Birth and Death Registry in Ghana, since as a country, amid COVID-19, we kept asking ourselves, are we going to continue to collect data in the traditional way, or are we going to drift to the non-traditional data sources, which is the order of the day? So we're working towards a transition to administrative data. For that reason, we had that higher governmental coordination to bring these institutions together to properly think through a scheme where we can harmonize our statistical processes. So fortunately, prior to the pandemic, we had started some, we had resorted to some non-traditional data sources, i.e. we're heavily involved in the call detail records, which we used extensively during the pandemic to look at mobility and how infection rates are panning out. We're using our citizens-generated data to capture data from the perspective of domestic violence and waste. We're using big data in different respects to ensure that we get a better understanding of what is happening within the national statistical system. So we were more or less prepared in several perspectives ahead of the pandemic, especially at a time that as a statistical agency, just within a year of the pandemic, our new law had been passed. We had just launched our corporate plan for the period 2020 to 2024. We had gotten onto the harmonization project in West Africa, which is being funded by the World Bank. We had done a staff satisfaction survey. We had developed a document on competency framework. So just ahead of the pandemic, within the organization, there were quite a number of interventions that were in place and that had made the organization more recognizable, more useful within the economy. So it sort of set the pace for us to make ourselves more relevant during the pandemic. And it's worth mentioning that all these were made possible because we had harnessed quite a number of bilateral and multilateral collaborations, i.e. having some informal relationships with institutions such as the Kenya Bureau of Statistics, such as Statistics Rwanda, and also some formal relationships with the Office of the National Statistics in the UK, Statistics Denmark, and Statistics Norway. And from the multilateral point of view, as I indicated, we had engagement with the United Nations Development Program that funded 2 of the 3 COVID-19 trackers. We had engagement with World Bank, which I talked about earlier on the harmonization and improving statistics in West African project, and also ongoing collaboration with UNICEF, which partly funded the COVID-19 tracker on household survey. So on the multilateral front, we had quite a number of interventions that were going on ahead of the pandemic that put us in place. And this is the ex-ante dimension that I talked about earlier on in terms of the characterization of resilience. I would end off my presentation with 3 takeaways, and the first takeaway is accepting and getting to the recognition and making others aware that data is the only way to go. And from my point of view, if you want to do this, there are 2 things that you need to do. As I indicated, you need to prove the concept of the implications of not using data. So in the event where something happens and there's no data to say that we did not see it coming, that is the cost that I'm talking about, and we should be able to not qualitatively talk about it, but put some financial cost to it and say that if we had had data, this would have been the implications. So one of the things that we did ahead of the census is to put out there how the census would have given us data in a way that in the event of the COVID-19, all the stimulus packages that were going to households, we could have done that in a way that it wouldn't be on ad hoc basis. So we made an attempt to provide the unit cost of an indicator for the census, and also making a case that moving forward, we don't have to wait decennially to do the census, but getting into the hybrid of using administrative and other big data sources to provide some information on areas where we can easily intervene with data in the event of pandemic. So now there's a conversation around bringing all the telcos together to see how we can use that rich big data source to inform where we need to put our resources in the event of a pandemic. And lastly, my takeaway message is sustaining this proof of concept. So it's not just a matter of doing it once, but it's a matter of doing it regularly, because you need to look at it from multiple perspectives. As I said, it's just one perspective looking at it in the event of a pandemic, but in all other policy areas, we need to sustain the proving of the concept that if we do not use data, these are the consequences. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Mr. Anim for addressing resilience of statistical systems with enriching examples from Ghana. And thanks everyone for your attention. Now, I'd like to welcome back everyone and invite you to session 7. This session will be chaired by Ms. Claire Malamide, CEO of GPSDD, who oversees the work of global team at the GPSDD for equitable, reasonable, and sustained data use for development. She was previously managing director of the Overseas Development Institute, and in 2014, she worked in the office of the UN Secretary General, writing a World That Counts report. She is an affiliated researcher at the University of Cambridge and serves on a number of boards and advisory groups, including in the Data Science Campus of the UK Office of National Statistics and the Overseas Development Institute's Human Mobility Initiative. So let me invite Ms. Malamide to chair session 7.
Thank you very much. Welcome to everybody. It's great to have you back with us. I hope you've enjoyed the conference so far, and I can promise you that this session is going to be really interesting. And in many ways, this session is the key to unlocking much of what we have already discussed. And many of the possibilities and the proposals for change that have been already discussed, as we know, are reliant on input, are reliant on financing, are reliant on knowledge, are reliant on technology, are reliant on different inputs to make them possible. So we in this session are really going to be focusing very much on what are the things that are needed to make everything else happen, and who needs to contribute in what ways to make sure that we can all meet the ambitions and the needs that have been expressed so powerfully in the previous sessions. It won't be all about money. Of course, we always default to talking about financing. That is important. But as we know from our work at the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, the other partnerships that focus on knowledge exchange, that focus on the development of capacities and skills, and that focus on technology and software also have an absolutely critical part to play. And really, this is something where we need to think about combinations of resources and partnerships that bring in different actors with different perspectives and different abilities to contribute, if we're able to meet the ambitions and to make sure that data can play its part in resolving the challenges of the world and bringing about the world that we want, the world that was promised in the Sustainable Development Goals. This question of partnerships for knowledge, for resources, and for skills and for technology is absolutely at the heart of our business at the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. So I'm very excited to learn from my colleagues this morning and have a chance to discuss some of these issues. For those that are listening on the live stream, there is a facility for you to ask questions from our panel, and very, very keen that you should do so. So as people are speaking, if there are issues you'd like to know more about or areas where you would like to challenge some of the assumptions and statements that are being made, really keen to hear from you. So I will introduce our speakers in the order in which they speak. And I think, first of all, we have a short video recorded for us by my friend and colleague, Mr. Johannes Jutting, who is the director of Paris 21, based at the OECD, an organization which obviously has huge amounts of experience and expertise in this area of capacity building, skills and training for official statistics. Johannes.
Dear colleagues and friends, Thank you so much for inviting me to this very important conference jointly organized by Statistics Korea and the United Nations Statistical Division. My name is Johannes Jütting. I'm the executive head of Paris 21. I would have loved to be with you in virtual or in presence, but unfortunately that is not possible. At least you can see a little bit of the Eiffel Tower behind me, which I'm currently close to as we have been moving slightly back to work. I wanted to address the topic of the technical and financial needs that we face as we go forward with respect to the crisis, with respect to mitigating risk, and what this has to do with statistical offices and official statistics. The first point I wanted to make is the COVID-19 has a dual impact on official statistics. On the one hand, we have seen a huge increase in the demand for better data and better statistics. All over the world, we can see policymakers asking for timely data, for more granular data, and for better data overall on many things, which is a good thing. So there is a lot of demand for our services. On the other hand, all of us have seen the data gaps in quality and timeliness. So there's a huge need for technical innovation. There's a huge need for modernization of statistical offices all over the world, in particular linked to digitalization, which brings me to my second point, which are the needs. There will be many parts in this conference. You have already discussed the needs, so I wouldn't like to go in any detail here, but of course it's very clear that digitalization of statistical offices, in particular in more poor environments, is very critical to move forward with this agenda to produce more and better data that matters for people's life. But all this has to be financed. We need more and better funding. We need funding for the whole system and not just piecemeal approaches. So we need to invest not only in more and better health data, but we need to have a foundational data investment. And this brings me to my third point, which means to introduce to you the clearinghouse. The clearinghouse, which has been populated by the Bern network for more and better funding for data and statistics. And the clearinghouse will be launched at the UN World Data Forum in Bern, which will take place in October. So the clearinghouse will be hopefully the means, the tools that brings together, on the one hand, the demand from countries for funding. So if you have a specific demand in your given country, you can go to the clearinghouse and you can see, does this demand align what is going on in your country in terms of existing investment in censuses, in surveys, in data and statistical infrastructure. But you can also see what is on the supply side. Are there funders like World Bank, UN, agencies and bilateral donors that could potentially fund your need? So the clearinghouse will bring both together, demand and supply, for identifying projects and opportunities for making more and better funding a reality for many of you in this world. So I really wish you with this, come and follow the discussions about the clearinghouse. I hope to see you in Bern, and I wish you all the best for your conference here in Seoul. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johannes, and good to get a glimpse of the Eiffel Tower when we are not allowed to travel. That is the next best thing, to be able to look at landmarks over our colleagues' shoulders. So I think the point that Johannes made there about investment in systems is absolutely critical, and one that I hope we can come back to as we think about ways to make sure that resources are doing the absolute best good that they can in terms of building up a whole system, rather than simply investing in very separate, in the separate parts of it. Before we get into the discussion and hear from our live speakers, let me also, we now also have a video from Mr. Craig Hammer at the World Bank. As I'm sure all of you know, the World Bank World Development Report this year was devoted to data and the importance of data for development, with as always, fantastic analysis and really interesting proposals for how to make sure that we are leveraging the best from data, from new technology, while also avoiding some of the dangers that lurk in this new world that is being built. So let's now hear from Craig. Thank you.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I do wish I could join you in person, but I'm delighted to be here even in pre-recorded form. My name is Craig Hammer. I'm a program manager at the Development Data Group in the World Bank, and I want to start by thanking our gracious hosts, Statistics Korea and UNSD, for the chance to join you, and of course our intrepid moderator, Claire, for focusing on this crucial topic. I also want to emphasize that today's discussion is so timely. I think the fact that we're having this discussion is a good sign that increased awareness of the need for stronger international cooperation to support national statistical systems is starting to materialize. It's important to note that we've recently seen some bright spots. It's not all bad news. The World Bank has already started to expand its lending portfolio for data and statistics. Specifically, back in December 2019, the bank announced that our IDA replenishment, that's the source of our lending portfolio for the world's low-income countries, reached a record level, $82 billion. And that money would be used to finance a range of support across sectors over the next several years, but includes a handful of key commitments to data and statistics. And so we've seen an uptick in lending to strengthen national statistical systems, to institutional modernization, and to start filling some key data gaps to the tune of several $billion. Now, this is a good start, but we know there's much more work to be done and sizable financing gaps to fill. So additional, deliberate, coordinated action is needed in the immediate term to maximize opportunities. Now, some of the most heartening progress on this front is happening where donor resources are intentionally pooled and used to leverage each other's financing, but also to leverage significantly larger sources of already available financing, like World Bank loans, for data and statistics. Now, this can unlock an increase in domestic resources to sustain the transformation of national statistical systems in low and middle-income countries. And so the World Bank is presently establishing a global umbrella fund for data called the Global Data Facility. And it's designed to do exactly that. The bank is launching the Global Data Facility in a response to a call to do so 3 years ago by the HLG. That's the UN Statistical Commission's high-level group for partnership coordination and capacity building. The HLG emphasized the need for an innovative funding mechanism to strengthen the capacity of national data and statistical systems and help overcome data deprivation across regions. So that's what the Global Data Facility is designed to do. Think of the Global Data Facility as a one-stop shop to cover support for data and statistics across the entire data value chain. So that's institutional strengthening, human resources, capacity building for NSOs and other data producing agencies, development and implementation of national and subnational data strategies and action plans, statistics, legal and institutional frameworks, technical equipment, statistical infrastructure, ICT support, plus capacity building across non-government groups to help enable or scale data use by non-statisticians. That includes putting it to work for public goods by working with universities and civil society organizations and NGOs, journalists, civic technicians, youth organizations, and more. It also includes support for data production and dissemination. So that's supporting household surveys, budget and poverty surveys, closing gender data gaps, rapid surveys to track living conditions more regularly, improvements to economic and price data, revisions and upgrades to national accounts, support for administrative data, enabling open data and other data dissemination and data discoverability transformations. This includes more support for big data, geospatial data, mobile phone data access, analysis, and use, and enabling access to private sector data for public goods, that and more. It also supports strengthening data governance and data management, data protection institutions and policies and tools, more investments in M&E and rapid impact assessments, and mid-implementation reviews to enable course correction to ensure that maximum impact is being achieved. Research is also supported heavy-duty analytics in collaboration with countries to put country data and their analytics to work for national and subnational priority setting and decision-making processes. It supports partnerships with global centers of excellence to collaborate on engagements. It supports twinning resources and other support to minimize fragmentation among implementing organizations in the data and statistics landscape and ensure that countries get the maximum value for every dollar spent. That's a lot, but it's that and more. And how are we going to do it? The answer is together. The Global Data Facility will serve as both a coordination mechanism itself to bring donor resources together and focus them on shared priorities, and as an enabler of scaled support for data and statistics, as I mentioned, by leveraging other resources such as World Bank IDA or IBRD lending, and exponentially increasing levels of external support and unlocking increased and sustainable domestic resources for data and statistics across the countries that we support. It's designed to ensure country-led, flexible, adaptive approaches. The Global Data Facility's financing strategy is directly drawn from the roadmap in the Cape Town Global Action Plan, and it'll serve as the bank's formal implementation mechanism for recommendation and insights from the World Bank's 2021 World Development Report entitled Data for Better Lives. It'll help us deliver on priorities and reforms across the countries we serve for the medium to long term. It's also going to rely on insights from the Bern Network's clearinghouse platform and its efforts to track the supply and demand of support for data and statistics across countries and organizations. These connected initiatives, the Global Data Facility and the Bern Network Clearinghouse, will target support for countries' mission-critical priorities, including strengthening the availability, the quality, the usability of data, refining measurement methods and tools, promoting innovation, and enabling countries to transform their national data systems. Now, as a core member of the Bern Network, I'm also pleased to share that the Global Data Facility will launch at the UN World Data Forum in Bern this October. Now, I'm sure this panel will emphasize that we need a step change in coordination and collaboration in support for data and statistics. And I agree. There are many organizations and groups working to support the global data and statistics landscape, and the only way we can deliver the best value across these countries and achieve durable transformations is together. This is why the World Bank is working so closely with partners across the data and statistics spectrum, from colleagues on the HLG to partners in NSOs around the world, as well as other data producing agencies and partner organizations, including colleagues on this very panel. So with that, let me close. I want to thank our hosts again for inviting me to join you today, and I really look forward to an opportunity to continue this discussion live and in person, hopefully sooner than later. Thank you, and have a great conference.
Thank you very much, Craig. And I think that is really important news about the Global Data Facility. It's a while since we really saw a significant new development in the area of financing for data. I think let's all hope that this is it and that it succeeds, as Craig said, in really lifting the volume and the quality of financing for data. I think we're going to be hearing over the next hour or so just how much that is needed. Let me turn now to the panel who are here. Welcome. And invite, first of all, Ms. Rachel Bevan from the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office at in the UK. To give us her perspective. Rachel leads on data for development. I think is a friend to all of us on the panel, and I'm sure well known to all of you also in the audience. Has huge expertise in this area. And Rachel, look forward to hearing what you have to say. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope you can see my video.
Yes.
Great. So I just wanted to talk just briefly today, and thank you first of all, sorry, for inviting me to be part of this panel. I have, managed to actually watch a few of the sessions live. I didn't manage to make it to all of them, I'm afraid, particularly not those in the middle of the night here. But what I saw was extremely interesting, really stimulating. The UK has actually had a really long history of actually helping other countries to build their statistical systems, as well as actually our own experience of how we've been modernizing our own National Statistics Office as well. And personally, actually, I think I've got around over 20 years experience as well. So I just wanted to share some lessons today about what we've learned over those years. So I just want to share 5 quick lessons from the work we've been doing on modernizing data systems. Firstly, I think one of the really important things is about learning from each other. So 3 years ago, we set up a new program with the UK Office for National Statistics, and that was really helping them to actually develop their international development work. So previously they had been doing a little bit of support, but not really kind of on a larger scale. So what they've done is they've actually been able to build partnerships with Ghana, Statistics Office, Kenya, Rwanda, and the UN Economic Commission for Africa. They've been providing targeted technical assistance in areas like census, data visualization, data science, basically in any area that the country has identified as being a priority. But they've also, alongside that, they provided training, they provided mentoring as well. So the UK national statistician at the time, John Pullinger, was personally mentoring some of those heads of the national statistics offices, as well as Oliver at UN Economic Commission for Africa. But I think that what was really important from that is that it's not a one-way thing. This was very much about how they could actually learn from what other countries were doing as well. And lots of times we've heard examples of people who've gone out to a country, they've been helping on a particular area, but then they've come back to the UK and they've kind of shared their experiences and actually been able to integrate some of the different things that they've seen going on in other countries. And one of the other examples I wanted to share as well in terms of learning from each other is on the Open SDG platform. So that was a platform that was originally developed by the USA. The UK then took the code, which the US had made open, which is fantastic. We're able to take it, adapt it a bit, and then use it for our own SDG reporting platform. But then we've also been able to actually share that with other countries. So I noticed as well that South Korea is also on the list of other countries that have been using the Open SDG platform. But I think it's been really important that actually we don't all need to do it on our own. We can do these things together, learn from each other. And I know that, you know, as the UK has been actually kind of sharing and helping other countries to build their platforms, people have made numerous suggestions about how the platform can be improved. And we've been able to then integrate them back into the UK's own platform. So it's very much a two-way process. The second lesson I'll say is about starting small, but building for scale. With the modernization of national data systems, it's a huge challenge, and it's important that we do think big. We want to actually make this kind of wholesale change, but it's important also not to be completely overwhelmed by the scale of things and to actually start quite small and get kind of with some small targeted activities, and that actually then you can demonstrate the impact, and it's much easier, I think, to actually get people to buy into it and to get the support that you need to then scale up. I think that was one of the lessons for one of the sessions I did hear from the government statistician from New Zealand when he was speaking about the work they've been doing on an integrated data infrastructure. They started as a pilot, they were able to demonstrate some use cases, and then it made it much easier to scale up. So I do think that's really important. Start with a really targeted kind of issue or kind of policy question, and then demonstrate something to the policymakers, and then you can kind of actually get support from that and build it up. The third lesson I would say, and this I think is actually something Craig touched on as well, is about being agile. So we know that, you know, working with different countries, different organizations on different areas, activities always move at different rates. But also we know that new needs emerge all the time, and we've very much seen that with COVID. So it's important we do have those kind of, you know, long-term work plans, but it's important that we also are flexible and keep kind of looking at how we can reprioritize and make sure that what we're doing really does meet the policymakers' needs. So it's about being agile in what we do, but also that we could be agile in how we do it. We've learned through COVID that, you know, it is possible for large numbers of staff to work from home. It's possible to do remote training and lots of other activities. That doesn't always mean that that's the best approach. So I think the challenge is going forward is to actually think about, you know, when we're doing a new activity, to think about actually, is that something that is best done remotely, or is that something that's best done kind of face to face? So being agile and actually thinking about that, and not just perhaps going back to our default assumption that everything needs to be done face to face, or indeed that everything can be done remotely. Fourthly, I think what's really, really important is building that senior level support. So we know that progress is not the same in every country, and places where we actually see faster progress seem to be those where they've really got that senior level support. So I'd say one recommendation is to look for that champion. Look for any kind of data champion that you can find kind of anywhere in the system. It could be within government, within a national statistics office, or it might be in another line ministry, it might be in the private sector or in an NGO, but someone, and try and find somebody that can really help with that senior level engagement. And then that means it's much easier to actually be developing your system and actually targeting it to what they need and to get that support that's really needed. In the UK, we've been trialing this year a new data masterclass for our senior level civil servants. And that was part of that was to really help to kind of scale up the work that we're doing in the UK and to actually kind of build capability across the whole civil service in terms of how we can use data and data science. So we've developed a senior civil service kind of data masterclass. We've been rolling it out. I'd like to say in our department alone, we think we've had around 90 senior leaders sign up for the course, most of whom have then completed it, I'm pleased to say. But it's also been really, really successful in getting them really engaged in the agenda. They've been actually able to see how important data is, but they've also been able to see the impact. So we've got a lot more enthusiasm that we're now having to follow up and work through what we can do. We are now looking as well at what we could do to actually make that a wider offer and actually to offer some or all of that course to other countries as well. The fifth and kind of final lesson I would say is about using innovative approaches. Innovation can really help us, and we've really seen that in the last 18 months. But we need to make sure we still carry on building foundational systems, but we can do that in innovative ways. We can use satellite imagery to help us. We can use new data sources to actually help us. They can often be more efficient and also more effective. I mean, just one small example, but in the UK, over the last year, we were using shipping data to help us to produce some faster economic indicators and to actually be able to look at the impact of COVID much more quickly. Having done that for the UK, we're also now adapting it and looking at how we can use that in Kenya and some other countries as well. But I just wanted to really summarize my key message, which is on this slide, is around think big, start small, and scale fast. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. Really great, great start to the discussion and a lot to think about there. I think as well as some of the themes around coordination, working together, the importance of systems, the two things that'd be great to come back on there in the discussion. First of all, this question of scale. We all pursue scale. We all say we're going to scale. It's harder to do than it is to say. So really interested to hear about experiences, lessons on that. And then, of course, this question of politics and political support, both on both sides, in a sense, political support in donor countries for investments in data, which perhaps don't have quite the immediate attraction of investments in health or education, say, and then, of course, political support to be able to really put in the investments and the time to build up effective systems and to make sure that the data is used. So it would be great to come back to the politics as well in the conversation. I hope those of you who are watching this online are also making your own contributions to the conversation through the website. Okay, before we all dive into that though, let me introduce our next speaker, Mr. Guillaume Miranda Dutra, who is the methodology officer of the UNODC Center for Excellence, which is a collaborative center for excellence run by the UN Office on Drugs and Crime and the National Statistics Office of Korea. So really interested to hear from you, Guillaume. I mean, I think this question of data for measuring crime, the role of data in enabling countries to manage crime and justice is probably one that is a little bit underserved often in our discussions. We talk more about data on health, on education, environment, and so on. So really, really interested in your perspective and learning from some of the work that you've been doing on capacity development. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you very much for the invitation from Costa to be here. I'm talking from Daejeon, the Republic of Korea, at the Training Institute of Costa. And thank you very much as well for the UN Statistics Division for co-organizing this important conference. As Claire mentioned, I'm gonna talk about crime statistics. So I'm gonna talk about data from the specific angle of crime. And as Claire mentioned, this, although it's still within the broader discussion that has been brought during the days of the conferences, and also our head in Vienna also made an interesting presentation on that. Crime statistics has specific characteristics, and let's talk a little bit about it and see which are those characteristics. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the nature of official crime statistics and how it has changed in the past decades, and how we need to change our responses due to that. So traditional crime statistics is similar to other official statistics that you collect administrative data, and data that you can collect administratively, you have to collect carrying out surveys. But what's important to stress is that crime statistics is based on this traditional official statistics idea of building a comprehensive and centralized system. Or let's say that trying to create an impression that you can measure all crimes possible. And as you might imagine, this is extremely complex. Crimes are committed to be hidden. So it's quite an effort to go there and measure them. So here I synthesize some of the changes in the past decades that we saw, both in crime and both in crime statistics. So traditional crime statistics and traditional criminal thinking, and I think many of us still think that way intuitively, is this idea around the behavior of the criminal, of the offender, right? That's why the profiling movement nowadays is so strong. When we talk about crime data, the idea that we have is trying to predict crimes, right? Trying to predict the actions of individuals. However, criminological theory nowadays is focused on socioeconomic factors, in cultural explanations for crime, and data needs to move forward on this. These, in practical terms, need collecting data disaggregated by a high number of variables. So with this change, with this change on the crime, the nature of how we understand crime, data also needs to follow. Also, the avenues for cooperation and the new forms of criminality. As crime nowadays, it's hard to find a form of criminality that's not transnational. Also requires data that's comparable. And in the last 20 years, that's something that affected all of us work with data, is these new technologies, this data science, this big data, how this affects specifically crime statistics. And so nowadays we see official crime statistics as the center of a microsystem of many data sets, many projects, many methods. So there's not more this idea of the National Statistics Office holding the last word on crime statistics. It still has its mandated position, but it needs to produce a dialogue with other data sets and other organizations. Here's a summary of how nowadays it is, a little bit of what I said so far. So it's the complex research questions. This information is demand driven. Let's say a police officer now is interested in data, right? There's a police officer can use data, and that's something that National Statistics Office need to follow and understand, that although they need to produce this data, do their mandate, they also need to produce data that's useful for the users, which is law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, offices, police officers, and combining different sources and methods. Administrative data and surveys are going to still be essential, but nowadays we have so many other tools that I'm going to talk a little bit later. And how COVID has impacted. Well, as I mentioned, there has been definitely a movement in the last decades, in the last, let's say 60 years, but COVID has just accelerated that, because we all moved online, right? Now we're all online, and this is a great opportunity for cyber attacks. There are opportunities just after COVID became so easy, and this requires new understanding of how you're going to measure this. Measuring cybercrime is completely different from measuring certain forms of crime for several reasons. And at the same time, although crime has risen in this sense, lower reporting rates have been observed because people don't have the capacity, mobility to go to a police station, or for answering to service, face-to-face service. So COVID just makes it clear to us that we need to think about collecting crime data differently. And I want to talk a little bit about this as well, because this is, I think, is where our center of excellence enters. We think of crime as an international, transnational phenomenon. And so we think of data collection as well, a transnational phenomenon, which is it changed a little bit the way that traditional official statistics is taught. The traditional official statistics is usually led by governments, by national governments, to collect data in specific countries. But here at the COE, at the Center of Excellence, as Claire rightly introduced, is a project between the Statistics Korea and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime to try to bring this international perspective to crime data collection. So we are a knowledge hub in the sense that we connect National Statistics Office, we produce research, and we share this research through trainings, through technical support for specific surveys or data collection instruments, and increase the capacity of this office to respond to new crime, to the new crime threats. This is the core of our work, the methodological standards that we work with, and collecting data that's comparable to produce global estimates through the UNCTS and according to the UNODC methodological standards. So now the specific innovation tools we see, and we've seen that's being applied and the things we think should be applied. So there's this buzzword, big data, right? I think everyone knows about it. We talk about big data, but sometimes it's a bit hard for us to understand how this can be applicable because it's so new. So we are still, I think all of us are still trying to understand where this is actually applicable. And that's something we think a lot here, how we can apply all this gold mine of data. So when we think about big data, we're actually thinking about two things, sources and methods for analyzing data. These are complementary, but they're quite different. And when we think about official statistics is not going to be replaced by ever, because official statistics is both a source that can be analyzed according to new methods, but is also can incorporate new sources and methods for the estimates that are done at the national and international levels. Here are some examples of I think they're really interesting of how Asia Pacific is I had so many examples to choose from, so it was really hard choosing only 3 because Asia Pacific is the place for innovation, not only crime statistics. I think this region is fascinating on how has this innovative thinking. So Kazakhstan, for example, is a region with strong capacity in crime statistics and also a political interest in making data public, which is at the end of the day, it's core for crime prevention. And they have a high level engagement in this sense, and we as a country work a lot, and we see as a data champion, which is interesting, as Rachel mentioned. We see them as a data champion in the region that we work here. India has this I Pay the Bribe. It's not a government led, but it's an interesting case of how also crime data collection is not necessarily government led, it's also community led, and this is where people go there and report that they pay the bribe. And Singapore has leveraged a lot mobile solutions for reporting crime. So instead of people going to the police station and everything that's involved in that, right? You can report crimes through your app for your phone or iPad. So here at the COE, some things we're working on. I'm just gonna really briefly mention, my time is almost up. So I'm gonna mention that we're developing methods for measuring cybercrime. This is a topic extremely important here in the region. And so we're trying to develop methodological guidelines for that. And we're also trying to understand how we can use web script data on self-reported database for hackers, for example, for estimating level of cybercrime. So this is just one idea we have in the case of cybercrime, but the idea of self-reported data, it's extremely important for crime, but we're still not sure how much the level of confidence we can have on these reports. So this is a huge area of research for us. And also we're trying to work on communicating data, communicating thematic topics and how data is important for countering crime here. So finishing my presentation, although this is all very exciting, we can never forget that there's many buts on this. And I want to focus on the first one, algorithm-based inference, because in crime specifically, we need to have accountability, correct? This is such a political constraint topic. It's so delicate, and it's hard using these algorithm methods and just putting this black box and having this result and say, well, this is going to predict crime there. And how we're going to explain to public opinion, or going to explain to law enforcement agencies how this decision was made. And some of these algorithms are impossible, contrary to statistical modeling. They're not interpretable. So that's a big challenge. So moving forward on this, we believe that the traditional methods are still going to be there forever. There's no way to change this. It's the only way you can get confidence intervals for this data. However, we need to incorporate new methods and partnerships between agencies. Building data, producing data that's useful for agencies is essential for countering crime. And this is done also through data literacy training inside these organizations to understand the power of data and also the problems that interpreting data can bring. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much. Happy to have this discussion. And in case of any questions, just send me an email. Always available to talk.
Thank you so much, Guillaume. Really, really interesting. And as I said, an area of data and statistics that that we don't often introduce into the conversation, but as you say, absolutely critical from both for citizens and of course politically as well. I mean, as a producer of knowledge, I'm really interested to come back to you in the conversation to think a little bit more about what are the resources that are required to enable countries to actually benefit from and adopt some of the innovations that you're developing and thinking about partnerships with others. So it would be great to come back on that. But before we do, gives me huge pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who many of you will have seen already. Shada has already delivered a keynote address to this conference, but we're very delighted that she's able to join this panel as well today and have perhaps a slightly more interactive moment at the conference. Shada Baidi is the director of Open Data Watch, has been involved in this sector and really driven many of the developments in the data for development sector over many years. And perhaps also worth noting, was one of the members of the independent group of experts that worked with my team to produce the report A World That Counts, which in many ways is one of the, I still think, I don't know whether you agree, Shada, is one of the, still one of the foundational documents for the discussion that we are having, along with more recent additions like the World Development Report that we've just heard about. So over to you, Shada.
Thank you, Claire, and thanks for adding me to this panel. I'm a late addition, so I don't know if it's bad news or good news. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'll just make some observations and then maybe we can open it up for a discussion. As Claire said, I've been spending most of my life on data and particularly investment in statistical data. And just to sort of frame our discussions, I wanted to maybe give you a little bit of information of where we stand now on investment in data and statistics based on the work that we're doing with Paris 21, which also Johannes has mentioned. First of all, the needs for countries to invest in data is very high. And as we see, over 63% of the countries express very clearly that they need to do more investment in data and statistics. And there are very few countries that we know in the low middle income group that are independent from international aid and their statistical systems are actually financed through domestic resources. Also, we know that the official development assistance, the portion that goes to data is relatively small, and we have measured is about 0.4%, but we need to raise it to close to 0.7, 0.8%, almost doubling it. So we have a big task ahead of us. And if you look at the risks and the conflicts and crises that we are managing right now, in fact, the cost of all our estimations are probably conservative. In other words, we do need more investment in data and statistics, both because some of the resources have been shifted from data and statistics to others. For example, 150 countries had planned to do their 2020 and 2021 census at these years, and some of them, the resources clearly have been shifted to other areas. So we do need increased investment. And unfortunately, we see that a lot of emergency funding is being made available for example, COVID-19, but very small portion of it is allocated and focused on data and statistics, despite all the clarity that we do need more. The last time we looked, almost 0.4% only was going to data and statistics. So we need to really do more of showing that for emergency funds that are being allocated for building back better systems in governments, data and statistics should be a big part of that. So this is kind of giving you a sort of an idea of where we are on that. It's very clear from the presentations that we've heard and all the other interventions during this conference that we do need to invest in a national statistical system, and we need to invest in a system-wide approach. Claire, you said it, and also Craig very well said it, that we need to invest along the data value chain. We can't just put a lot of resources into production and not in the other elements of the data value chain. So without data becoming available, used and measured for impact, is really wasted resources. So it's very clear that the new framework for investment should be on national data systems along the data value chain. It's also, we're learning more and more that investment should be driven by countries themselves. They should plan it, they should prioritize it. It cannot be dictated from donors, even if donors have some favorite topics or favorite areas. It really has to be invested by the countries and planned. And one of the things we see from the national statistical strategies, NSDS, is that not all countries have updated plans, and not all countries in their updated plan actually deal with budgeting and resource mobilization and what they're going to do about it. So we need to do better on the planning side in many of the countries. So what I'm basically campaigning for is really to be much more focused on understanding the needs of countries and help countries to do that needs analysis and what they need to do. And then, of course, through the BERN network and through other networks that you've heard of, we're trying to improve the actions and coordinate the actions so that we can match needs and actions much better going forward. And then the other thing, which is very important, and I want to bring to this topic, is really just needs and action by themselves, even if you coordinate, is not enough. We need to be able to measure results and demonstrate results. So if you will, the three parts that I'm really focusing on is needs, action, and results. And there, Claire, we can talk about it a little bit more. There's a lot of important research, important interventions and innovations that's happening on measuring results that I'd be happy to elaborate on. But even WDR, World Bank, my group, and others who are working on how to measure governance, how to measure data use, how to measure effective data production. So there's a lot of work going on there. So I'll stop here and happy to also answer any questions on the work that Johannes mentioned on development of the clearinghouse and what we are launching at the World Data Forum in 31 days from now. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you so much, Shada. And since we've already had a few mentions of the World Data Forum, let me recognize colleagues from the UN Statistics Division who I see here have got up very, very early in the morning to be with us today. So let me also thank Francesca and Linda, who have really helped us to working with COSTAT to put this event together. Thank you so much for all your help. And perhaps these early starts are just reflective of your life at the moment, as Shada says, since we are only a month away from the World Data Forum. So thank you all very much. Really, really interesting presentations, and I think a lot to chew on. Before we get into some of the kind of more in-depth substantive issues, we have one question for you, Guillaume, from the audience, and they would like to know what kind of technical support your organization is providing to countries in the Asia Pacific region.
Perfect, thank you for the question. So we provide We provide trainings, specific trainings on how to implement these methodologies that I mentioned, the ICCS, trainings on how to develop crime victimization surveys, and we also do the engagement with countries directly. We put countries in contact. We sit them at the table to talk. Now we're having this initiative based on finding champions in the region, and we're putting countries that we identify as possible champions to discuss and to find what works and what doesn't. So, and we do research as well that we then share with countries to try to improve. But as Shada rightly mentioned, our work is based on the needs of the countries, all tailored. So we are approached by countries. We have a portfolio of activities that we provide, but we are countries contact us. They say we need this, we need support on this survey, we need support on the ICCS, we need support on submitting UNCTS data, we need support on collecting SDG data for mostly SDG 16, and then we develop a package of different kinds of support.
Thank you so much. Really nice concrete example. So perhaps let's start with this question of that sort of came up in several of the presentations about this question of kind of matching supply and demand and making sure that the resources that are being offered match the needs of the countries that we hope will be able to benefit from them. It's surprisingly difficult and complicated. It seems incredibly easy, I think, to say it and obvious, and kind of one would question why almost you needed to say it at all. Certainly in our work, trying to broker partnerships often between public and private sectors, you know, we find that although both sides can be very clear about what they need and there's a huge intention to work together, there's a huge amount of goodwill and common aims, it can be surprisingly difficult to match the incentives, the ways of working, the constraints of very different types of institutions, and develop really substantive partnerships and ways to work together. So I wondered, Rachel, might come to you first. You know, there's been a lot of, we've obviously heard from Craig and from Johannes and others about the sort of need to make sure that donors are meeting the specific needs of countries and that country priorities are driving the agenda. But as always, I suspect that if it were that simple, we would barely need to say it. So I just wondered kind of what that looks like from a donor perspective, and some of the constraints and challenges that might get in the way of everyone's aspiration to do that.
Thanks. Yeah, it's often easier to talk about these things than to do them. But I think that, you know, when we're talking about, you know, what we would actually need to do and what would really kind of, you know, shift things and how we could better kind of do it, I do think one thing that has made a difference is having somebody on the ground. So actually with our program with the ONS, they've actually put a person into each of the countries who's physically there. So when we talk about coordination, it's always much harder to do that and much harder to kind of match demand and kind of, you know, and supply when you're not in the country and we don't really understand, you know, necessarily the full kind of context and you haven't got those relationships. So I do think that one thing is possibly around, you know, really being actually in a country, but also really being there, understanding relationships, understanding the needs of that country, but also, you know, as those needs emerge as well, as things change, if you're actually there, then it's much, much easier to kind of respond to that than it is if we're kind of slightly kind of, you know, distant, and we're trying to then kind of match what we're doing with what a country are trying to do and vice versa. So I suppose for me, I would say that, yeah, actually having a person in country and having the right person in country is really important, and making sure that we kind of, yeah, are building those kind of true partnerships. There's more than just coordination. It is actually working in partnership together. I mean, I could say a bit more about the scale question as well, if that's helpful. Because you're asking before about, you know, then how do we really scale up? I mean, I do think, you know, that as well. One of the things I think in terms of scaling it up is to recognize that actually this does take time. So we can't just do it by kind of, you know, doing things on a small scale, you know, short time periods. So again, I think actually having somebody in country and building that long-term relationship, but also the long-term relationship, say, between two organizations is also very helpful. That takes time to establish at the beginning, but is really worthwhile. Then I think that does help. I also think, you know, when we're talking about scaling up, and I was saying about, you know, starting small, but I think the real key there as well, there is that thinking big. So you still, if you're starting small, you're not starting in isolation, but start on kind of building on what is there, but also what you build needs to be done in an interoperable way, so that actually you're using those kind of international data standards. Whatever you're developing then has the right kind of data systems kind of standards built into it, and building in that kind of interoperability. And I do think, I mean, as well, I would say that technology can really help us. There've been some massive advances in the last few years that perhaps we never even had, you know, the opportunity to do before. So things like, you know, API highways, you know, that means that you can kind of, you know, access data from different sources without having that need to kind of, you know, take data from one system to another. I think, you know, that actually means you can kind of, you know, leave the data where it is, but then actually work on those linkages and bringing it together and kind of making that full use of data that's there already. Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel. No, I think really important. And I think this question of interoperability, again, as sort of certainly one of the routes to scale and replicability, again, is one where it's sort of a very obvious public good to encourage replicability. It's also one where sometimes you bump up against some of the challenges of commercial incentives and business models and so on. So I think there's a really interesting discussion to be had there, which goes way beyond simply financing, and is really about sort of partnerships and the complexity of partnerships between organizations that have very, very different business models. Shada, just to come back to you on this, I mean, I think that the sort of two challenges here really about that are connected, but in a sense, the two sort of challenges that possibly we talk about most often in the area of financing. One is this question of priorities and making sure that what is the resources, whatever they are that are being offered, are a very good match for the priorities of the country where they will be used, and who's driving that conversation. And then, of course, the extent to which those priorities are going to help build a system and build a system at scale rather than simply implement a project. And I think, you know, the data for development world has perhaps been, you know, extremely good at implementing projects, not so good, I think we should probably all acknowledge ourselves, at developing scale. So I wonder, Shada, if you have some examples of where this is happening well, who's getting this right, and what are some of the lessons that we might be able to learn from that?
Well, I wanted to go back to the question that you also had for Rachel, if I may. I think that's really the sort of this matching of the demand and supply also very much comes to the question that you have mentioned. I wanted to say that I have seen in person that putting someone, a chief lead statistician in countries by donors really helps, but it really helps within that project and within that context that that donor is investing in that country. So it would be really much better if we invested in, you know, building much more you know, capacity in countries, you know, for better articulating their demand and keeping up with the demand and doing the coordination. What we have observed, which comes to your question, Claire, is that in the countries that, for example, we've tried to link results and people who are concerned with results and with financing, which means Minister of Planning and Ministry of Finance. If you link them to the National Statistical Office and the countries that have really strong leaders, for example, in Ghana, in Kenya, and a few other countries that we work with, the leadership of those countries actually makes those connections. And when you have those connections, you have much better articulation of priorities, articulations of the demand. So this new definitions that we are developing, and UN Statistics Commission and others are working on what is the new way of governing data and data stewardship. You know, I'm hoping to see these new skills that we need in the leadership for national statistical system to be able to much more connect the different ministries and really look at the national statistical system as a whole and prioritize demand and sort of match things, and maybe sometimes push back if somebody's pushing back to reshuffle resources from foundational systems to a sort of a household survey that the donor really wants quickly done, you know, maybe push back. So those are the kind of, you know, prioritizations and leaderships that we're seeing actually much more happening, and I think you know what I mean.
Thank you, Shada. No, absolutely. I mean, I think in certainly in our experience at the Global Partnership, we work with a network of partners on sort of working to try to create the partnerships to meet different capacity needs of countries. And I found it really interesting that there is just as much demand for exactly those kind of leadership management skills as there is for some of the technical skills that perhaps programs have traditionally focused on. And I think this whole area of being a good manager of data, a good user of data, and a good purchaser of systems, you know, and a good, you know, being good at kind of commissioning data projects is also increasingly part of the sort of skill set that we should expect from all senior leaders in all branches of government. So I think that's absolutely right, and that links back, Rachel, to some of the examples you were talking about of the masterclass. I've seen some of those sessions, and they are fantastic. So really looking forward to seeing that rolled out. I wonder, one of the other things which I mean, this whole question of coordination, I think, has come up several times, and the need for coordination and building a system. And I think, you know, what we've heard so far is, I think, really helpful in terms of thinking about individual relationships with donors and individual countries. And as both Rachel and Shada have said, I think the need for having, you know, people there who really understand the context and can make this part of an ongoing conversation, which can build over time, is absolutely critical. I'm interested, you know, both of the presentations, from Johannes on the clearinghouse and from Craig on the global data facility, really focused on the sort of the way in which both of those platforms might help to drive coordination between donors, as well as, you know, among the group of donors themselves, as well as between donors and the countries where funding is going. So I just wondered, you know, again, really interested to hear from both of you about, you know, what you see as some of the barriers to that coordination. I guess the sort of hypothesis behind the clearinghouse is that information is a barrier to coordination, and that if we provide more information, that will help through a clearinghouse mechanism, that will help with coordination. I guess the hypothesis behind the global data facility is that there is a kind of, if there is an institutional focus within which coordination can take place, that will help, and having a sort of strong institution like the World Bank helping to drive that coordination will help. They're different but complementary theories about how one actually achieves that coordination. So I'm interested from all of you on, you know, both Guillaume in terms of your sector specific experience, and Rachel and Shada in terms of your kind of much broader perspective. Just think about, you know, are those what you think about those two hypotheses, how they chime with your experience, how you think they're going to work well together, and if there's anything we're missing, what else is going to be needed to drive stronger coordination between different donors, multilaterals, and so on, to make sure that everyone is pointing in the right direction, and that that direction is driven by country priorities. Absolutely. Guillaume, you've been quiet for a while, so maybe let me start with you, and then go back to our other two.
Perfect, thank you. So in the specific case of it's extremely interesting to hear these perspectives, because although crime is let's say a niche area, it shares all the same challenges through a different some specificities. I think in this case, in the crime data is interesting because although it produces official statistics, in many countries it's not mandated by National Statistics Office. Some countries have specific centers for that. Crime data has been produced in some countries as part of traditional socioeconomic data collection, but in other countries it developed as part of criminology, which in itself has already its own independence, right? Let's say, right, as an area of knowledge. So in that case, in the situation of crime data, sometimes you have to put really different actors on the table, which I think applies as well for other areas, but in crime, you have to go through the law enforcement agencies, which are the ones collecting, having the monopoly of the collection of this data. You have to go through the more legal part, which sometimes doesn't communicate with the National Statistics Office. And there's as well a lack of understanding at the global level how this is done at the national level. You can't only just invest in a National Statistics Office and expect this to happen, because sometimes the collection of this data is not happening through the mandate of the National Statistics Office. The National Statistics Office is helping or is building a relationship with the law enforcement office officials, for example, to have access to this data. So in that sense, I think in crime data, maybe even more, if I might say, it needs to be extremely local based, because crime is a national issue. It's every country deals with crime in a specific way. Not that it doesn't happen with other areas, of course, but I think crime is a representation of the power of the state, if you're going to think theoretically, and this represents as well in how this data is collected. And in our case, how we try to we advocate a lot for the ICCS, the International Classification of Crime for Statistical Purposes, because these ICCS provides at least a common dialogue at the international level, that we can at least understand that we're talking about the same thing. But of course, this comes with challenges at the national level. We're talking about different jurisdictions. They face punishment different. They understand what should be criminalized differently. And now an initiative we're having on the SDG 16 webinar, we're organizing a webinar for the whole Asia region that's not directly specifically to National Statistics Offices. It's open to all government officials. And we think the SDG is also a way of putting this forward, of saying, well, there is a common understanding there, which is the SDG. You might have different views regarding peace, governance, but the SDG is a common understanding that your country has signed to. And I think that's a good way forward for us from the international community to go to countries and bring it. Yes.
Thank you. No, I think that's so interesting. And actually, that is something that is really critical. And we haven't yet talked about here is the role of those global normative frameworks, but also the global technical standards that are laid down by the UN Statistics Commission, and so on. And obviously with colleagues from UNSD also here today, I think both of those, we also need to absolutely see both of those as ways of driving coordination internationally in all sorts of ways. So thank you for raising that. I think really useful perspective. Shada, let me go to you first to just think about this area of coordination and current initiatives.
Sure. I think we have a very special time. As you've seen right now, there is an agreement between the HLG, the high-level group, on who are what I call the guardians of the framework for Cape Town Global Action Plan and its implementation. That pillar with the pillar of the development grant, what Craig basically presented, global data facility funding system from the bank, coordinated together with the Bern network and the clearinghouse. If you will, all these three pillars have agreed to coordinate and work together, which is really very special and I think a big achievement, and congratulations should be extended to all the leaders who are on top of these initiatives. So the theory of change that I have in mind for coordination for going forward, given these three pillars are going to be coordinating with each other, one is that we're going to have lots more information through the clearinghouse. So as we said, information is going to be really important, both for countries to generate that information and do better planning themselves. So the demand side, which is the information that we're going to be providing, is going to be critical. The other thing that's going to be through the working between these three pillars and also with the Bern network and the clearinghouse is that there's going to be much more connection to other groups that we have not really well connected before. For example, with the development effectiveness community, with the donors community through the Bern network, with maybe M&E monitoring evaluation community, with other communities who are very active and really instrumental. So aside from information sharing, this networking and linking everyone together is going to be a very, very important part of this coordination and this theory of change. The third one, as I mentioned, just close to my heart, is results monitoring. I think we're going to be kind of, using this energy behind the coordination between different pillars and the energy behind the innovations on results monitoring to make sure that we all come together and maybe even build the community around results monitoring. And finally, we've talked about that. We hope that new skills are developing, new leaderships are coming out, which naturally will help with the coordination. For some of the things that I'm really encouraged to see, for example, the DAC donors now paying much more attention to the data arm, and they even have a data a country profile. Each one of them have a country profile which summarizes exactly what they're doing on data. So we see that donors, not all donors, like with FCDO and UK, had people like Rachel, but the more and more donors have data people who are actually knowing what they're doing and explain investments in data. So those skills development, both at the country level with data stewards and data stewards at the donor agencies, will really help with the coordination. So it's information, networking, results, and building skills and leadership, which I think together will make this new coordination mechanism really something that we could build on.
Thank you, Shada, really helpful. And obviously FCDO has been at the forefront in a lot of the work that's been done on results and monitoring over the years. So Rachel, really keen to hear from you, how your team is approaching the question of results and monitoring. What are the key indicators that you think are a good means of evaluating the impact of our work on data? Sometimes we look at how data is affecting other things, but are there ways in which we can focus specifically on the impact that we're having on data systems themselves? So it'd be great to hear from you about that, and also this obviously challenging question of coordination. We're getting into the final minutes, so Rachel, it'd be great to hear from you, and any other last comments you want to make, and Shada and Guillaume, if you have any burning things that you want to come back on as well, you'll have a few seconds at the end to do so. But Rachel.
Thank you. When you're talking about barriers to coordination, I would definitely say they are high. There are definitely high barriers that we face every day. And I think, what we have to be upfront about them. We have different priorities. When I'm trying to kind of help a country, I'm trying to also make the case for funding. And that means that funding is coming basically from UK taxpayers. So we do have to kind of accept that means that there are slightly different priorities. But I think if we're upfront about it, I think that will come a little bit back as well to the point that you were just saying about kind of the results and demonstrating impact. That means that actually, because we've got different priorities, we have to be really, really clear. What are they getting for the money? Why is this actually important? So it's not just important, I think, as well, in demonstrating the impact of if we do this. I think what we're possibly not so good at is demonstrating what will happen if we don't do it. You know, what's the actual alternative? And the alternative is actually acting with bad information, and out of date information is sometimes worse than having no information at all. So I think perhaps having some better kind of stories on that, and what the kind of negative impacts are of not actually having the information, having up-to-date data, and how that really impacts on people's lives, I think will really, you know, would make a difference. The barrier to coordination, I think as well, a big barrier is probably time. I think we all face this, don't we? Actually, the time to kind of work out what's going on. I think one thing that would really help, and this is perhaps where COVID has not helped us, is actually in order to know what's going on and in order to understand different priorities, there's a real need to face-to-face kind of meeting together and building those relationships. You know, in a country where you've got a whole load of, as Shada was saying, you know, actually the network is extending all the time. There's more and more partners to be working with. That means you actually need to work together, but it probably also means actually spending time together and actually seeing people face to face. There's nothing that really replaces actually being able to talk to people and actually understanding where they're coming from on that. And that really, I think, helps to kind of build that coordination. And that's probably what we've been lacking. You know, the last 18 months has been particularly problematic for that. So I guess I would say, yeah, in summary, just, you know, yeah, let's not forget building those face-to-face kind of relationships across statistical communities within a country, but also, as we're doing today, across the whole community, and actually being able to demonstrate the impact of what we do, but also what we don't do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Great. Now we are unfortunately out of time, but let me thank you very much. Thank all of our speakers, Rachel, Guillaume, Shada. A really, really interesting. Thank you for being so open and frank and thoughtful about these difficult topics. And I think in the spirit of what Rachel was just saying about the importance of face-to-face, let us all very much look forward to perhaps at least some of us seeing each other in person next month now at the World Data Forum. So really looking forward to carrying on these conversations there virtually. Thank you so much to all of the panelists, especially thank you to the organizers, and wishing you all the best with the rest of the conference. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Claire.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Malamud and the panelists, for sharing insightful input for mobilizing and executing smart investment in data and statistics. This concludes session 7, and in fact, all our plenary sessions. We hope you find the sessions interesting and helpful. It's now time to conclude this meeting, and I would like to invite the representatives of COSTAT and the UNSD, two joint organizers of this conference, and ask them to share their views on what we've discussed over the last 3 days. Let me first invite Ms. Parucci, representing the UNSD, for her remarks.
Distinguished Vice Commissioner Mr. Kwang-Sop Kim, dear expert and colleagues, it is my great pleasure to offer a few concluding remarks as we close these 3 days of excellent contributions from a wide range of experts and very useful discussions. First, allow me to thank the government of the Republic of Korea for hosting this international conference and express our gratitude to Commissioner Kyung Kwan-ryu and the colleagues at Statistics Korea for their support and great collaboration in co-organizing this conference. As in previous years, this gathering has provided the opportunity to hear the experiences from many parts of the world and different data communities, but also to learn about the important work and innovative developments from our Korean colleagues. It is undoubtful that the pandemic has affected data and statistical operations in an unprecedented way in most countries. But we have heard that as governments around the world were fighting to control the devastating impact of the pandemic on the lives of people, and they were moving rapidly to address the destructive effects on their economies, data were central and more critical and needed than ever before. And while the crisis has certainly posed many challenges to the ability of national statistical offices to run key statistical programs and maintain their regular statistical operations, many national statistical offices and other partners from different data communities have really raised to the challenge very quickly, adopting new data solutions and accelerating innovation. We can now build on these many experiences, and these solutions are here to stay. During these 3 days, we've also heard how critically important it is to have in place agile and resilient data systems that can offer the necessary data when a disaster hits, and to design and implement preventative measures, as well as recovery policies and programs. The implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction require coordinated actions by national statistical systems, national disaster risk reduction offices, national geospatial information agencies, and all other stakeholders to have in place the needed data capacities. The pandemic has brought the critical importance of data to the forefront. The data and statistical community can now really build on this momentum to move this important agenda forward. But this, of course, is not possible without adequate funding and political commitment. Again, we can look at what we've learned over this last year and a half, showing the critical impact of data. In the case of the pandemic, data availability or lack thereof sadly could have made a difference in many cases between life and death. And how the impact of data can really increase the demand and can be used in turn to increase the possibility of mobilizing resources for it. These are all important themes that we collectively need to continue to focus on. In closing, I would like to invite you all to join us in Bern, Switzerland, as we gather for the 3rd United Nations World Data Forum, taking place between 3rd and 6th October 2021 this year. There we will have the space to continue the conversation around many of these topics. And for those of you who cannot travel to Switzerland, this year's forum also offers the opportunity to join remotely, so it will be a hybrid event. So thank you all very much again, and looking forward to seeing many of you in Bern. Thank you. Goodbye.
Many thanks to Ms. Perucci for nicely summarizing our discussion. Next, let me invite Mr. Kwang-Sop Kim, Vice Commissioner of COSTAT, for his conclusion.
Dear Director Schweinfest, Assistant Director Francesca Perucci of the UNSD, distinguished guests, on behalf of Statistics Korea, I'd like to begin by expressing my deepest gratitude for your active participation during the past 3 days. The lively discussion reminded me of my days at UN headquarters. It's good to see you again, Francesca. Your efforts for the 2021 International Conference on Official Statistics seems to have been paid off by its success. Dear colleagues, it has probably become a cliche by now, but let me iterate one more time that we are going through truly unprecedented times as statisticians. The pandemic has accelerated the modernization of NSO and the need for technical assistance, not only for new survey methodologies, such as web and mobile-based platforms, but also for more remote operations. There is a growing demand for integrated data and statistics. In this regard, the diverse cases shared during this conference on how to respond to the pandemic and prepare for future crises were instrumental in helping us understanding the concrete needs of users and data and statistics. I would like to once again thank all speakers and participants for sharing their valuable knowledge. The Sendai Framework sets out a pathway to reduce disaster risks. Under this paramount guideline, national statistical offices are given the task of furnishing more appropriate, timely, and reliable data and statistics to governments and the major agencies so that these institutions can respond in a more agile and resilient manner to the post-COVID era. Thanks to the wealth of knowledge and experience shared during this conference, we are now one step closer to building a solid, interoperable statistical system. Our minds have been replenished by an array of ideas, shared cases, hard efforts made, numbers, commitment, and above all, visions. I hope the conference has reminded all national statistical offices of the importance of the data and the statistics we each own. Dear all, the 2021 International Conference on Official Statistics is now officially over. My gratitude goes to all the speakers, panelists, moderators, and attendees for their active participation despite the time difference and the difficult circumstances amid the pandemic. I would also like to thank colleagues from the UNSD, Francesca Perucci, Linda Hooper, and Lee Wang, and my colleagues of COSTAT and any other staff members working at the backstage for planning and running this conference. COSTAT prays that the conference will be held offline next year to meet all of you in person and share ampler experiences. Thank you for your attention.
I'd like to thank Mr. Kim for this wonderful closing. We thank everyone for your participation and contribution to the conference. If you would like to revisit all or any part of our conference, the video recordings of our conference will be or already are available in our conference website and YouTube. We hope you enjoy this conference. Thank you and goodbye.